Grandma, I won't let them get you. The cry tore through the frozen air, more a whisper of despair than a shout against the biting 70-man-datsukin wind. The girl, only 9 years old, felt her blood run cold in her veins, not just from the skin-chapping cold, but from the guttural growl echoing from the darkness. 1,000 wild, amber, hungry eyes gleamed in the snow, each belonging to a colossal 700-kilogram beast. Her grandmother, helpless and legless, lay on the makeshift sled, her old eyes pleading in terrifying silence. Little YAKUT grabbed the frozen axe, the metal burning her bare hands as the first gigantic shadow moved towards them. And what she would do next would defy all laws of nature and survival. The deep growl of the first beast made Anya take a step back, her heart pounding against her ribs. It wasn't just an animal. It was a mountain of muscle and fury, with eyes that reflected ancestral hunger. The girl, however, refused to be paralyzed. Her grandmother's voice, though silent, echoed in her mind. Courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite it. With a breath that burned her lungs, Anya raised the axe, not to attack directly, but to create a piercing sound, a challenge. She struck it against an exposed rock, the frozen metal resonating with a sharp crack that, for an instant, made the beast hesitate. That small sound was enough for Anya's sharp mind to start working. She remembered her grandmother's teachings about the forest, about how animals, no matter how wild, could be outsmarted by cunning. The deep snow was both an ally and an enemy. She looked at the sled, at her grandmother's pale face, whose lips trembled slightly, but whose eyes conveyed a silent strength. "Come on, Grandma, we'll make it," Anya whispered, more to herself than to the elder. Her first instinct was to move the sled. With the strength of her 9 years, she pulled the straps, her small muscles protesting against the weight of her grandmother and their few supplies. The sled slid with difficulty through the thick snow, every inch an arduous victory. Meanwhile, the tigers, which had paused for a brief moment, began to advance again, their movements slow and calculated, forming a menacing semicircle. The air filled with their wild scent and the vapor of their heavy breaths. Anya needed more time. She spotted a tangle of dry, frozen branches, remnants of a fallen tree. With the axe, she quickly cut them, forming a makeshift, noisy barrier. As she pushed the branches forward, the noise and momentary commotion diverted the attention of some of the nearest tigers, who growled, curious and annoyed by the unexpected obstacle. The girl used this small window to pull the sled a few more meters, her feet sinking into the snow, the cold penetrating her thin boots. Her grandmother, with visible effort, reached out her wrinkled hand and touched Anya's arm. Her eyes, previously pleading, now shone with a mixture of fear and pride. There were no words, but the message was clear. "Keep going, my little warrior." That touch, that deep connection, rekindled the flame of determination in Anya. She wasn't just fighting for her life, but for the life of the person who had taught her everything, who represented the wisdom of her people. The horde of tigers, however, was relentless. They weren't just hungry, they were a force of nature, a wall of beasts that seemed endless. Each time Anya managed to deter one or two with a simple tactic, 3 or 4 more appeared, their eyes gleaming in the growing twilight. The cold, previously just an annoyance, now felt like an overwhelming weight, numbing her fingers and toes. Exhaustion began to set in, but the image of her grandmother, helpless on the sled, was a shield against despair. Anya knew that every second, every inch gained, was a small victory in the battle for survival. The village seemed a distant dream, a refuge she needed to reach at all costs. Anya pulled the sled with a strength that seemed to come from a place beyond her small body, an ancestral reserve of resilience. Every inch was a battle, her muscles screaming in protest, the icy air burning in her lungs with each gasping breath. The tigers, like gigantic, hungry shadows, did not give up. They moved in a macabre ballet around them, their growls low and continuous, a song of death that seemed to vibrate in the ice itself. The girl knew that the improvised traps and axe blows were only temporary distractions, a stolen breath of time from the relentless fury. Her fingers were numb, her feet heavy as lead. Exhaustion began to cloud her mind, and for an instant, a wave of despair threatened to engulf her. The village seemed not only distant, but unreachable, a dream shattered by the cold and the imminent threat. She closed her eyes for a second, and the image of her grandmother's wrinkled face, with her eyes full of unwavering faith, brought her back. No, she couldn't give in. Not now. With a renewed breath, Anya opened her eyes and scanned the horizon, searching for something, anything, that could offer a real chance. The snow stretched infinitely, dotted with a few sparse trees and rock formations. But in the distance, a different gleam caught her eye. It wasn't the dull white of virgin snow, nor the grey of the rocks. It was a smoother, darker gleam that seemed to stretch like a scar across the landscape. A frozen river. Her grandmother, sensing the change in Anya's body tension, made a small guttural sound, a murmur of encouragement. The girl turned to her, and a faint but determined smile touched her cold, cracked lips. "Grandma, I think I know what to do," she whispered, her voice hoarse. The elder squeezed Anya's arm with her trembling hand, a silent communication of trust and love. Anya remembered the ancient stories her grandmother told on long winter nights about the dangers of thin ice and how YAKUT hunters, in times of great need, used the treacherous terrain itself to their advantage. She knew that the tigers, in their blind fury and the urgency of hunger, might not perceive the difference between solid ice and the treacherous trap hidden beneath the snow. It was a desperate gamble, a dance with death itself, but it was their only hope. Guiding the horde to the river would be the hardest part. She would need all her cunning and every ounce of her courage. The tigers were getting closer, their enormous bodies exhaling heat into the icy air, their eyes fixed. One of them, the largest and most imposing, stepped forward, a louder, more menacing growl escaping its throat. Anya felt a shiver run down her spine, but her mind was clear now. The plan was formed. It was risky, but it was a plan. She began to pull the sled in a new direction, no longer straight towards the village, but in a calculated arc, aiming for the dark gleam of the river. Each step was heavier than the last, but the flame of hope, however faint, now guided her movements. She needed to lure the predators, to make them follow her into that natural trap. Her love for her grandmother and ancestral wisdom were her only weapons against the white vastness and the wild fury that surrounded them. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning to take an even more dangerous and ingenious form. With the axe, Anya struck the air, creating a sharp sound that echoed in the icy stillness, a calculated provocation. The tigers reacted, some advancing more aggressively, drawn by the noise and movement. She leaned, feigning a momentary fall, and quickly recovered, pulling the sled with renewed effort. This small act was enough for the nearest predators, those leading the horde, to focus their attention on her, following her trail with renewed ferocity. The river ice, now more visible, seemed to call to them, a promise of easy prey. Anya felt the hungry gaze of the tigers burning on her back, a palpable pressure that propelled her forward. Every fiber of her small body ached, but she couldn't stop. The frozen river approached, a dark and treacherous strip beneath the thin snow. She pulled the sled with her grandmother, her small feet making deep tracks, her breath forming dense clouds in the frozen air. With each step, Anya looked back, making sure the predators were following her, their amber eyes fixed on her, the seemingly easy prey. Her grandmother, on the sled, watched her granddaughter with silent intensity. Her lips were pale, but her deep, wise eyes conveyed a strength that Anya absorbed like a balm. There was no need for words. The connection between them was stronger than the cold, more powerful than fear. The elder knew what Anya was trying to do, and her unwavering faith was the greatest encouragement the girl could have. Anya reached the river's edge, where the snow was scarcer and the exposed ice revealed its dark, smooth surface. She made an abrupt movement, as if stumbling, and let out a small cry of panic. It was a desperate lure to attract the nearest tigers. The largest of them, the pack leader, growled with redoubled ferocity and quickened its pace, followed by dozens of others. Their massive bodies, accustomed to the solidity of the land, did not hesitate. A faint crack, like a dry branch breaking under the snow. Soon the sound intensified, transforming into a deep, terrifying groan coming from the ice itself. The dark surface began to crack in irregular patterns, like a giant spiderweb. The leading tigers, in their blind fury, were already on the trap. Their eyes, previously fixed on Anya, now widened with belated understanding. The ground beneath them gave way, a sound of ice shattering, followed by an abrupt plunge and the churning of icy water. Cries of surprise and growls of panic echoed as the tigers' enormous bodies thrashed in the freezing waters. The horde, which had been right behind, stopped abruptly, confused and frightened by the sight of their companions struggling in the icy abyss. Chaos ensued, a cacophony of growls, splashes, and the groaning of ice that continued to give way. Anya didn't wait. This was the moment, with a strength that seemed to spring from her soul. She pulled the sled with her grandmother, quickly veering away from the river's edge and running to the safety of the opposite bank, where the ground was firmer. Her muscles burned, her lungs ached, but adrenaline propelled her. She didn't look back, couldn't hesitate. The sight of the tiger's despair in the water was terrible, but also her only chance. Her grandmother, her eyes fixed on her granddaughter, squeezed Anya's hand again, a gesture of gratitude and relief. They had gained a reprieve, a precious instant of advantage. The horde was divided, some tigers still trapped in the ice, others retreating in panic. The path to the village, though still long, seemed a little less impossible now. Anya, covered in snow and exhaustion, felt a wave of renewed hope. Love and ancestral wisdom had proven to be the most powerful weapons against the savagery of the YAKUT winter. The journey continued with a new breath of life. Anya didn't look back, but the sound of cracking ice and the tiger's desperate growls echoed in her mind. With a breath that seemed to tear her lungs, she pulled the sled with her grandmother, moving away from the treacherous river's edge. Her exhausted muscles burned with pain, but adrenaline and her grandmother's eyes propelled her. They had gained time, a reprieve, but the white vastness stretched out, and the village seemed a tiny speck on the horizon. The horde, though diminished and disorganized, had not disappeared. Anya felt the gaze of the retreating tigers, their fury and hunger still present. They wouldn't risk the thin ice, but the pursuit wouldn't cease. The girl knew she needed to maintain her pace, each step a challenge against the relentless life-sapping cold. The snow, once an ally, now became a heavy obstacle, hindering their progress. Her grandmother on the sled raised her wrinkled hand and touched Anya's face, whose cheeks were red and chapped by the wind. A faint smile, laden with gratitude and silent strength, formed on the elder's lips. That wordless gesture was a balm for the girl's soul, an injection of courage that reminded her why she fought. It wasn't just for survival, but for her lineage, for the wisdom her grandmother represented, for the unbreakable connection between them. Anya responded with a nod, her eyes watering from the cold and emotion. She squeezed her grandmother's hand for an instant, feeling the fragile warmth of the wrinkled skin. That touch was a bond, a promise. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. But the beauty of the landscape was overshadowed by the threat and the urgency of finding shelter before darkness and intense cold swallowed them. She focused on each step, on each pull of the sled. Anya's mind worked feverishly, searching for the next refuge, the next strategy. Her grandmother's stories about YAKUT resilience, about how their people faced winters that would kill anyone, echoed. Never give up, my little one. The strength of our people lies in our ability to love and to fight for those we love. Her grandmother's imaginary voice was a mantra, a beacon in the growing darkness. Exhaustion was an enemy as potent as the tigers. Anya's body trembled uncontrollably, and her movements became slower and more uncoordinated. She stumbled a few times, almost falling into the deep snow, but the image of her grandmother, serene and confident on the sled, prevented her from giving in. Love was the fuel that kept her flame alive, a stubborn ember in the heart of winter. Finally, as darkness swallowed the landscape, Anya spotted a rock formation that seemed to offer shelter. It wasn't the village, but it would be a place to rest, regroup, perhaps light a fire. With a last, desperate effort, she pulled the sled towards the rocks, her knees almost giving way. The path was still long, but with each breath, each heartbeat, Anya felt the unbreakable YAKUT resilience blossom, a promise that together they would find their way home. Anya guided the sled with her grandmother to the protection of the rocks, her knees trembling and her entire body crying out for rest. The rock formation was a dark crevice in the mountain, a precarious shelter against the biting wind and the snow that was beginning to fall more densely. With a sigh of relief, mixed with exhaustion, she leaned the sled against the most sheltered wall, away from the entrance. Her almost frozen fingers could barely feel the axe as she dropped it beside her. Her grandmother, with visible effort, tried to move, her eyes fixed on her granddaughter with silent concern. Anya knelt beside her, taking out a piece of reindeer hide that served as an extra blanket and carefully covering the elder's legs. "We'll be fine here, Grandma," Anya whispered, her voice hoarse with cold and fatigue. Her grandmother squeezed her hand, a gesture worth more than 1,000 words, conveying the strength and faith the girl needed. The priority now was fire. Without it, the cold would consume them before dawn. Anya began to gather dry branches she found on the crevice floor, some already covered by a thin layer of snow. She knew that lighting a fire in the extreme cold of Yakutia was an art, a battle against humidity and wind. With trembling hands, she took a piece of flint and a metal scraper, essential tools her grandmother had always taught her to carry. The first strike produced a weak spark, which died almost instantly in the humid air. She tried again and again, frustration beginning to mix with despair. Each attempt exhausted her already limited strength. The cold seemed to intensify, penetrating her clothes and numbing her bones. The image of the tigers, though distant, still haunted her mind, and the darkness of the crevice seemed to hide hungry eyes. Her grandmother, observing her granddaughter's struggle, made a small sound, drawing Anya's attention. With a slow and careful movement, the elder pointed to the back of the crevice, to a darker, deeper part that Anya hadn't noticed in her haste. "There," her grandmother murmured, her voice weak but laden with a meaning the girl recognized. Anya crawled to the indicated area, curiosity and hope mixing with fear. The faint moonlight entering through the crevice's opening barely reached that spot. As she fumbled the ground with her numb fingers, Anya felt something different. It wasn't rock nor snow, it was a smooth surface, as if polished by time, and on it, a series of marks. She leaned in, trying to discern the shapes in the gloom. They were footprints, not a tiger's footprints, but something much larger, heavier, with claws that left deep grooves in what appeared to be a type of hardened clay. Anya's heart leaped. She had seen such footprints in old village books, drawings her grandmother showed with almost sacred respect. They were the footprints of a polar bear so far from the coast, deep in the interior of Yakutia. It was almost unthinkable, a sign that nature's imbalance was reaching terrifying proportions. The crevice that had seemed a safe refuge now revealed itself as a possible den. or a passageway for a predator even more formidable than the tigers. Her grandmother, her eyes fixed on her granddaughter, read the terror on Anya's face. She made a movement with her head, confirming what the girl feared. The shelter was not safe. They had exchanged one threat for another, perhaps even worse. Anya felt an even deeper wave of despair, exhaustion, the cold, the tigers, and now a polar bear. It seemed the icy vastness of Yakutia was determined to test the limits of her resilience in every possible way. But then her grandmother reached out her hand again, and her wrinkled fingers touched Anya's arm with surprising firmness. There was something in the elder's eyes, an ancestral calm, a wisdom that said, "We cannot give up. There is always a way." The girl looked at the bear's footprints, at the darkness of the crevice, and then at her grandmother's face. The unwavering love between them, the promise to survive, rekindled the flame of courage in her chest. They couldn't stay there. They needed to move again, find another refuge, but this time with a new and terrible awareness of the danger lurking. Yakutia never ceased to surprise, and survival demanded constant vigilance, incessant adaptation. Anya knew that the journey was far from over, and that each step would be a new battle against the relentless fury of winter. Anya felt the icy air tighten her chest, not just from the cold, but from the terror the polar bear footprints inspired. The crevice, which moments ago was a refuge, transformed into an even more dangerous trap. Her grandmother, with a look Anya understood perfectly, indicated the exit with a subtle nod of her head. There was no time to hesitate, for despair to set in. They needed to get out of there, and fast. With an effort that seemed superhuman, Anya stood up, her stiff and aching muscles protesting with every movement. She picked up the axe, her only companion for defense, and with trembling hands began to pull the sled out of the crevice. Every inch was a struggle, the ice and snow hindering their progress. The darkness outside was almost complete now, only the pale light of the moon and stars offering some visibility. The wind howled, carrying snowflakes that whipped their faces. Her grandmother, on the sled, kept her eyes fixed on Anya, a flame of determination burning in her pupils. Her lips moved in a silent prayer, a plea to ancestral spirits to guide her granddaughter. Anya felt this energy, this unwavering faith, and it propelled her. She was not alone. The connection between them was a shield against paralyzing fear. As they emerged from the crevice, the cold hit them with redoubled force. The temperature seemed to have dropped even further, and the air burned in her lungs with each breath. The landscape was a sea of white and shadows, and the village, a distant point of hope, seemed even more unattainable. But Anya couldn't afford to look back, nor to the distant future. Her focus was on the present, on each step, on each pull of the sled. She knew that the tigers, though dispersed by the ice trap, could still be lurking, and the threat of the polar bear was a new shadow hanging over them. The girl needed to find another place, a true refuge, before the cold overcame them. Her eyes swept the horizon, searching for any irregularity in the landscape, any sign of a depression in the terrain, or a smaller rock formation that could offer temporary shelter. Exhaustion was overwhelming, but the idea of remaining exposed in the icy vastness, or worse, returning to the bear's crevice, was unthinkable. She squeezed her grandmother's hand, which was extended in a gesture of support. The wrinkled skin was cold, but the touch conveyed a warmth that came from the soul. "We're almost there, Grandma," Anya lied, more to herself than to the elder, her voice a hoarse whisper lost in the wind. Her grandmother merely nodded, her eyes conveying a deep understanding. She knew the journey was uncertain, but she trusted in her granddaughter's resilience. Anya spotted a small elevation, a gentle hill that offered slight protection from the wind. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. With the last reserves of her strength, she began to climb the slope. the sled dragging heavily through the snow. Every muscle ached, every joint creaked, but she refused to give in. The image of her village, of lit fires and familiar faces, was a beacon in her mind. Her love for her people, the promise to bring her grandmother back home, was the force that propelled her. Upon reaching the top of the hill, Anya felt a momentary relief. The wind was a little less biting there, and the snow seemed less relentless. She leaned the sled behind a small ice protrusion, creating a minimal barrier. There was no way to light a fire there, but at least they would be less exposed. Her grandmother, with a faint smile, pointed to the sky. The stars shone with a rare intensity, and the northern lights began to dance on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of green and purple. It was a breathtaking spectacle of beauty, a reminder of nature's majesty, but also of its relentless indifference. Anya knew that the night would be long and cold, and that danger still lurked in every shadow. But as she nestled beside her grandmother, feeling the fragile warmth of her body, a new determination ignited in her heart. They had survived tigers and polar bears. YAKUT resilience, the strength of their love, would guide them through the darkness. The journey continued, and with it, the promise of a new dawn. Anya nestled closer to her grandmother, feeling the fragile warmth that still emanated from the wrinkled body. The wind, though slightly less fierce behind the ice protrusion, still blew mercilessly, bringing with it the promise of even more intense cold as the night progressed. Her small fingers were numb, and she rubbed them against each other, trying to bring some life back into them. Sleep was a tempting call, a promise of relief, but Anya knew that giving into it would be dangerous. The cold could steal their consciousness and ultimately their lives. Her grandmother, with an almost inaudible sigh, moved her hand and touched Anya's hair, a gentle caress that made her tremble, not from cold, but from emotion. That touch was a constant reminder of her mission, of the precious life she carried on the sled. The northern lights danced in the sky, their vibrant colors painting the dark canvas with a breathtaking spectacle. For Anya, it was a reminder of Yakutia's wild beauty, but also of its indifference. Nature was grand and relentless, and survival was a delicate dance between admiration and respect. Hunger began to gnaw at Anya's stomach. They hadn't eaten since the start of the hunt, and physical and mental exhaustion had depleted their last energy reserves. She thought of the supplies they had left behind in their haste to escape the tigers, of the dried fish and reindeer meat that would be a feast now. But there was no time for regrets. The priority was to stay alive. Her grandmother, as if reading her thoughts, pointed to a small leather pouch hanging from the sled. Anya, with a start, remembered that her grandmother always carried a small stock of medicinal herbs and some dried fruits with her, an ancestral habit for emergencies. With trembling hands, she opened the pouch and found a handful of dried blueberries and some flakes of smoked reindeer meat. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them some strength. She offered most of it to her grandmother, who, with a faint smile, refused, pushing it back to her granddaughter. "You need it more, my little one," the elder murmured, her voice a thread of sound. Anya insisted, but her grandmother was firm. "Half for you, half for me, together, always." The girl obeyed, feeling the warmth of love and sharing warm her chest more than any fire. As they chewed slowly, the taste of the blueberries and meat brought a small relief. Anya's mind began to clear. They couldn't stay there forever. Dawn would bring a new chance, but also new dangers. They needed a plan, a route. Her grandmother, with a thoughtful look, pointed to the east where the sun would eventually rise. The village, always towards the rising sun when the snow confuses the paths. Anya nodded, absorbing the wisdom. It was an ancient lesson taught by generations of Yakuts who navigated the white vastness with only the sun and stars as guides. Hope, however fragile, rekindled in her heart. The night would be long, but they were not alone. The strength of her lineage, the unwavering love between grandmother and granddaughter, and the promise of a new dawn would guide them through the darkness. The journey continued, and with it, the unbreakable YAKUT resilience. The small shared meal, however meager, infused Anya with renewed energy, not just physical, but spiritual too. The promise of the rising sun, the clear direction given by her grandmother, was a beacon in the darkness. She snuggled closer, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of the elder's breathing, a sound that was music to her soul. The night, however, was far from over. The cold seemed to intensify with each passing hour, and the wind, even if softened by the hill, found every crevice in their clothes, every exposed piece of skin stealing their warmth. Anya rubbed her numb feet, trying to ward off the pins and needles sensation under her boots, a constant reminder of the threat of frostbite. Staying awake was a continuous battle. Her exhausted mind began to play tricks, creating shapes in the shadows and making her hear growls that might just be the howling wind. Fear, though tamed by determination, lurked at the edges of her consciousness, ready to manifest at any sign of weakness. Her grandmother, sensing her granddaughter's internal struggle, moved her hand again, this time to firmly hold Anya's. The touch was weak, but the message was clear. "I am here. Don't give up." The girl squeezed the wrinkled hand in response, feeling the deep connection that bound them. It wasn't just physical warmth, but the warmth of the soul. The bond of love that was the true strength against the icy vastness of Yakutia. The village stories, told by her grandmother on cold nights by the fire, began to echo in Anya's mind. Stories of ancestors who faced endless blizzards, who lost their way and found salvation in the guiding star, in unwavering persistence. "Anya, my little flame," her grandmother used to say, "winter tries to extinguish our light, but it is in the deepest cold that our courage shines brightest, like the stars in the darkest sky." These words were a balm, a shield against despair. Anya remembered a legend about a YAKUT woman who, lost in the snow, used her own heart as a compass, guided by love for her children. The girl felt her own heart beat strongly, not from fear, but from a love as vast as the surrounding landscape, which propelled her. She wasn't just fighting for herself, but for her grandmother, for the memory of her parents, for the continuity of her lineage and her people. It was an immense weight for such small shoulders, but also an inexhaustible source of strength and purpose. Time seemed to stretch, each minute an eternity of cold and vigilance. The northern lights continued their silent dance, a spectacle of beauty that, in other circumstances, would have filled Anya's heart with wonder. Now it was just a backdrop to her struggle for survival, a reminder of nature's magnificence. Her eyes burned, and her head felt heavy, but she forced herself to remain vigilant, sweeping the dark horizon for any sign, any threat that might emerge from the shadows. Each time sleep threatened to drag her into oblivion, she pinched herself, wiggled her toes, sang a YAKUT lullaby softly, more to keep herself awake than to soothe her grandmother, who was already dozing peacefully, confident in her granddaughter. Anya felt a pang of guilt for thinking of herself, but her grandmother had always taught her that taking care of oneself was, in fact, taking care of those you love. She took a deep breath, the icy air burning her nostrils, and focused on the east, the village, the warm fires, the warmth of family embraces. That was her destiny, her promise. Darkness still reigned, but on the distant horizon, a faint lightning began to tint the sky, an almost imperceptible grey, a promise that the night would not last forever. It was just a premonition, a distant promise, but enough to rekindle the flame of hope in her heart. The journey continued, and the unbreakable YAKUT resilience propelled her towards the new dawn that was breaking, bringing with it the certainty that together they would face whatever came. The almost imperceptible grey on the distant horizon deepened, transforming into a pale blue-grey hue that slowly expelled the shadows of the night. Anya felt a shiver of renewed hope warm her chest, a stubborn ember against the cold. The sun was still hidden, but its promise was palpable, an invitation to follow. Her grandmother, who had dozed off, opened her eyes, her lips curving into a faint smile as she saw the sky lighten. She squeezed Anya's hand, a gesture of gratitude and encouragement. The girl felt the strength of that touch, the wisdom of generations transmitted without words, a legacy of resilience. Getting up was torture. Every muscle in Anya's body screamed in protest, stiff and aching from the biting cold and continuous effort. Her feet were heavy, numb from the temperature, but the image of the rising sun and her grandmother's confident gaze propelled her. She knelt beside the sled, checking the fastenings, feeling the texture of the wood and leather with her numb fingers. She needed to ensure safety for the next stage. The axe, her faithful companion, was firmly secured, and the small pouch with the last blueberries and smoked meat was intact, a small treasure. The wind lessened a little with the approach of dawn, but the cold remained relentless, an icy embrace that penetrated to the bones. Anya took a deep breath, the air burning in her lungs, and began to pull the sled again. The weight of her grandmother and their few belongings seemed even greater, but the girl refused to give in, her will stronger than exhaustion. She looked to the east, to the point where the sky began to tint with shades of pink and orange, and focused her energy on that beacon of hope. With each arduous step, Anya sang an ancient song in her mind, a YAKUT melody about the strength of the reindeer and the ice taught by her grandmother. It was a way to maintain her pace, to ward off the fatigue and doubt that tried to creep in. The landscape was vast and desolate, a white sea stretching as far as the eye could see, punctuated by distant rock formations and solitary trees covered in snow like ghosts. The threat of the tigers and the polar bear still loomed, a constant shadow that kept her alert, her eyes sweeping the horizon for any movement. Her grandmother, on the sled, kept her gaze fixed on her granddaughter, an expression of serenity mixed with deep concern that Anya understood. She knew how much the girl was suffering, the immense burden she carried. She reached out and touched Anya's shoulder, a gesture that said, "Keep going, I am with you, my brave one." The girl felt the energy flow through that touch, a reinforcement of her determination, an unbreakable bond of love. The connection was a bond stronger than the cold, more powerful than fear. As the sun finally peaked above the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant colors and casting golden light upon the shimmering snow, Anya felt a wave of emotion. It was a new day, a new chance to survive. The village was still far, and the path arduous, but the promise of light brought tangible hope. She remembered her grandmother's words, "Even in the darkest night, the sun always returns." And with that truth in her heart, Anya continued to pull the sled, a small point of courage and resilience in the icy immensity of Yakutia, guided by love and ancestral wisdom. The sunlight, though beautiful, brought no warmth. The temperature remained merciless, and the air continued to cut like sharp blades. Anya felt her lungs burn with each breath, and exhaustion began to weigh like a mountain on her shoulders. Her steps became slower, more dragged, and the snow seemed to drain her energy with every movement. She pressed her lips together, tasting the metallic tang of fatigue. The horizon, once a beacon of hope, now seemed to recede with each attempt to approach it. The village, which in her mind was a bright, warm spot, seemed a distant, almost unattainable mirage. Her grandmother, noticing her granddaughter's silent struggle, pointed with her chin to a rock formation further ahead, a cluster of dark stones that stood out against the whiteness. "There," the Wind Valley. After that, the frozen river. And then, home. Her voice was weak, but it carried the authority of one who knew every stone, every curve of that merciless terrain. Anya nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The Wind Valley was famous for its treacherous currents and the deep snow that accumulated in its depressions. It would be the last major obstacle before the river. She gathered every ounce of her strength, every fragment of her will, and launched herself against the snow again, pulling the sled with fierce determination. Her muscles trembled, and icy sweat ran down her forehead, but she refused to stop. With each step, she repeated her grandmother's words, like a mantra, a promise. The Wind Valley was as treacherous as the elder had described. The wind howled with renewed fury, whipping snowflakes that blinded Anya for moments. The snow was deeper there, reaching her thighs in some places, making each step an exhausting battle. The sled sank and got stuck, requiring Anya to stop and free it, spending precious seconds and even more energy. Despair threatened to engulf her. She felt tears freeze on her eyelashes, but repelled them with a shake of her head. There was no time for weakness. Her grandmother on the sled reached out and touched Anya's arm again, her eyes fixed on her granddaughter's. "You are strong, my little flame, the strongest of us all." The whispered words were a balm for Anya's exhausted soul. She squeezed her grandmother's hand, feeling the unbreakable connection between them, a bond of love that was more powerful than the cold, exhaustion, or fear. With a silent cry of defiance, Anya made one last effort. She crouched, almost crawling, and used her own body as a lever, pushing the sled inch by inch through the deep snow. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, but she saw only her grandmother's face, the glimmer of hope in her eyes. She couldn't fail, not now, not when they were so close. The Wind Valley finally gave way, and the snow began to lessen. Ahead, a white, smooth expanse revealed itself, the frozen river. And beyond it, in the distance, a small cluster of dark dots, from which faint smoke rose into the sky. The village. Home. The sight of the village, though still distant, infused Anya with a strength she didn't know she still possessed. It was as if the warmth of the fires and the sound of familiar voices already reached her, dispelling the cold and exhaustion. The frozen river before her was a vast, white plain, shimmering under the rising sun. It seemed like a bridge to salvation, but Anya knew that the smooth, treacherous surface hid dangers. Undercurrents could create thinner ice spots, invisible to the naked eye, and a fall there would mean the end. Her grandmother, with a nod, indicated a slightly diverted path to the right, where snow accumulated in small elevations, suggesting thicker, safer ice. "The ancients always said, 'Where the snow nests, the land hides,'" the elder whispered, her voice a little stronger now, laden with a silent urgency. Anya understood. It was a lesson of centuries. The wisdom of her people etched into the memory of every YAKUT. The snow, by accumulating, acted as an insulator, protecting the ice beneath and indicating more stable areas. With renewed caution, Anya began to pull the sled across the river. Her feet, previously heavy and dragging, now moved with a sharper purpose. Each step was measured, each movement deliberate. The river's silence was almost deafening, broken only by the crunch of snow under her boots and the slight glide of the sled. She felt her heart pound in her chest, a mixture of fear and hope. The village was getting closer, its outlines becoming sharper, the small plumes of smoke rising from the chimneys like warm invitations. Suddenly, a small, dark speck appeared on the village horizon. Growing rapidly, it was a dog-pulled sled coming towards them. Anya stopped, her heart leaping. Was it a search party? Hope exploded in her chest, a wave of warmth that made her forget the cold for an instant. She waved her arms, a hoarse cry escaping her dry lips. The sled approached, and she could distinguish the figures of men, their faces etched with concern. They were village hunters, led by her uncle, her mother's brother. When the sled stopped a few meters away, the men jumped off, their gazes fixed on Anya and her grandmother. Anya's uncle, a robust man with a thick beard, ran towards her, his eyes watering. "Anya! Grandma!" he exclaimed, his voice choked with emotion. He knelt, embracing the girl with a strength that made her feel safe for the first time in days. The tears, which she had suppressed for so long, finally streamed down her face, warm and liberating. Other villagers approached her grandmother's sled, their faces expressing relief and admiration. Carefully, they helped her out of the makeshift sled, wrapping her in warm furs. Her grandmother, with a faint smile, touched Anya's face. "My little flame, you saved us. You are the strength of our people." Her words, though whispered, resonated with the truth of an ancient prophecy. Anya felt exhausted, but a deep warmth of love and gratitude filled her. She was not just a 9-year-old girl, she was her grandmother's guardian, the heroine who defied the icy vastness and the fury of 1,000 tigers. The villagers looked at her with reverence, their eyes full of admiration. They had witnessed unbreakable YAKUT resilience, embodied in a small body, but with a giant and unwavering spirit. The journey was over. They were home. The village, with its lights and warmth, represented not only a physical refuge, but the confirmation that love and courage, even in the face of the most monstrous adversities, always triumph. Human connection, ancestral wisdom and altruism had guided Anya and her grandmother back to safety, ensuring the continuity of their lineage and hope for everyone's future. As they reached the center, a small crowd was already waiting for them. Familiar faces, previously tense, now lit up with smiles and tears of relief. The older women wrapped her grandmother in warm furs, while the men carried her to the warmest tent. Anya was surrounded by children. Her aunt hugged her tightly, a gesture of love, of being home. Inside the tent, the warmth was a balm. The smell of reindeer meat and herbal tea filled the air, making Anya's stomach rumble in relief. She sat near the fire, soaking in the comfort. Her grandmother was already on a bed of furs, with a steaming bowl of soup. Her eyes met Anya's, and a smile of pure happiness spread. "Eat, my little flame," she said. "You deserve every bite, every moment of peace this home offers." In the days that followed, the village became a haven of healing and gratitude. The wounds of cold and exhaustion healed in body and soul. The villagers brought Anya and her grandmother the best foods and herbs, telling stories of ancestors, reinforcing that Anya's strength came from a lineage of warriors. Anya, once just a child, was now viewed with respect. The children followed her, listening to her stories about the tigers and the ice, marveling. She felt the weight of responsibility, but also the joy of having made a difference. Her grandmother, recovering, spent hours telling Anya the deepest legends of their people. "Anya, you didn't just save us," she explained, her hand over her granddaughter's. "You reminded us of what we are capable of when love guides us. You are the spirit of Yakutia, proof that life always finds a way, even in the harshest conditions, and that hope never fades." Anya listened, absorbing every word, understanding that her journey was a reaffirmation of her community's values and her own essence. As the weeks passed, winter gave way to spring. Anya, beside her grandmother, watched the landscape transform. She was no longer the same girl. Her eyes carried a serenity born of overcoming and purpose. She had learned that true strength lay in the mind, in the heart, in the connection with loved ones, and in ancestral wisdom. The experience had forged granddaughter and grandmother into an unbreakable bond, a testament to human resilience. The village would prosper, not only from hunting, but from the unwavering spirit Anya had rekindled. The future, uncertain, seemed brighter, warmed by the girl's courage and her grandmother's eternal love. a legacy that would flourish for generations, perpetuating YAKUT's strength. That future, once just a distant promise on the icy horizon, began to unfold in vibrant colors, as real as the spring sun that now warmed the tundra. Anya's courage, the 9-year-old girl who defied the fury of 1,000 tigers and winter's deadly embrace, was not just a memory, but a living flame that burned in the heart of the village. She was no longer just the elder's granddaughter. She was the little flame, the unbreakable spirit of Yakutia, a beacon of hope for all. Her story was told and retold by the fires, each word a thread weaving the tapestry of her people's resilience. Anya, in turn, felt the weight and honor of this new role. Her eyes, once filled with the urgency of survival, now reflected a wisdom that transcended her young age. She watched the children playing in the melting snow, and in every laugh, every run, she saw the promise of a future she had helped secure. Each morning, upon waking, the cold still reminded her of the icy vastness, but the feeling of fear had been replaced by a resolute stillness. She knew that life in Yakutia would always bring new challenges, but now she carried the certainty that the strength to face them resided not only in her arms, but in her spirit. Her grandmother, sitting on her bed of furs, watched her granddaughter with a pride that warmed her soul more than any fire. Her aged fingers, which once wove stories and healed wounds, now caressed the furs Anya had helped prepare for the coming winter. "You are more than a heroine, my little flame," she whispered, her voice soft as the breeze that began to blow. "You are living proof that love is the greatest trap against despair, the strongest bridge over the abyss." She saw in Anya not only the continuation of her lineage, but the renewal of the very Yakut essence. The village, reinvigorated by Anya's feat, flourished. The hunters set out with new vigor, the women wove with more hope, and the children learned lessons of survival with renewed seriousness, inspired by the girls' courage. Community ties, already strong, tightened even further, united by gratitude and admiration. The nights were filled with songs and dances that celebrated life and triumph, and Anya's name was chanted in every melody, an echo of her bravery. Human connection, once a pillar, had become the very foundation of their existence. With the arrival of summer, the snow gave way to a green carpet speckled with wildflowers, and life exploded in colors and sounds. Anya spent her days helping to gather herbs with her grandmother, learning the secrets of the land, or accompanying the hunters on their rounds, observing and learning. She didn't hunt large animals, but her intelligence and ability to read the terrain were invaluable. She taught the other children tracking tactics and the dangers of thin ice, sharing the wisdom that life had imposed on her so early. Her presence was a constant reminder that strength was measured not only by size, but by the depth of one's heart. With each sunset, as the sky painted itself orange and purple, Anya and her grandmother sat together, watching the village. The silence between them was filled with an unwavering love, a connection that had been forged in the fire of adversity. Yakut resilience was not just a characteristic, it was a philosophy of life, passed down from generation to generation, and Anya, the little flame, was now its brightest guardian. The future, though always unpredictable in vast and icy Yakutia, now seemed less daunting, for the village knew that as long as there was love, courage, and ancestral wisdom, life would always find a way to flourish, perpetuating the unbreakable strength of their people for many generations to come.